So this week is Parshas Bahaloischa. Bahaloischu es hanerois el mul pnei menorah iru shivas hanerois. And I take this opportunity to discuss one of the most beloved and special mitzvahs that we have, especially Noshim Tzadkoniyos B'nois Yisrael, and that is the mitzvah of Ner Shabbos. Is our posuk in any way associated with Ner Shabbos? Well, at least according to the Medrash Tanchuma it is. And in Medrash Tanchuma we find that the name of Ner Shabbos on the posuk Bahaloischu es hanerois. So in today's shiur we will discuss some questions that are halacha l'maaseh, but primarily the fundamentals of this mitzvah. What is it all about? So we find three different reasons for Hadlukas Ner Shabbos: Kvod Shabbos, Einik Shabbos, and Shalom Bayis. Actually, Shalom Bayis is the only reason we find beferish in the Gemara, and that is Shabbos Chov Gimel Amud Beis. The Gemara deals with the question: a person has just one drop of oil and one wick, and he needs to be Madlik Ner Shabbos and Ner Chanukah, which has priority, which comes first. Maybe Ner Chanukah b'sos Persu Menisa, and the Gemara concludes, no, Ner Shabbos comes first. It's more important, Mishum Shalom Bayis. And that is the only reasoning we find in the Gemara regarding Ner Shabbos. However, in the Rishonim we find both Kvod Shabbos and Einik Shabbos. Rashi Chof Hei Amud Beis, when Rava says Ner Shabbos Choyvo, Rashi's opinion is Kvod Shabbos. And that is also what we find in the Rambam Perek Lamed in Hilchos Shabbos. Tosfos Chof Hei Amud Beis, Tosfos says Einik Shabbos. And we find that in the Rambam Perek Hei of Hilchos Shabbos. So the Rambam in two different sources, Perek Hei and Perek Lamed, brings both covered and both Einik, and that is somewhat of a chiddush we will discuss in a few minutes. Kvod Shabbos and Einik Shabbos are they mitzvahs d'oraisa or mitzvahs d'Rabbanan? Yeshayahu Perek Nun Ches. Ukarosel Shabbos Einik u'legdosh Hashem mechubad. And this posuk speaks both about Einik and Kvod Shabbos and Divrei Kabbalah. Divrei Kabbalah generally are considered the Rabbanans. However, Divrei Kabbalah have somewhat more weight and some more importance than other tkonos that are Medivrei Soifrim. The Rambam Perek Hei Halacha Aleph, when the Rambam says that Ner Shabbos is about Einik Shabbos, the Rambam writes Medivrei Soifrim. So the Rambam maintains it's a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. One of the Bali Atoyses, Sefer HaYareim, a mitzvah Chof, says it's Min HaTorah. Halacha LaMoshe Messinai and Yeshayahu Hanavi Asmechei Akro. And the posuk is an asmachta, but actually the mitzvah is a mitzvah d'oraisa. And there's some Sofer and Tshuva argues maybe that's the opinion of the Rambam as well, but Lefi Pshutam Shel Devarim. The Rambam and all the poskim following in the footsteps of the Rambam maintain that Ner Shabbos is a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. So, if the Gemara says Shalom Bayis, how do we know there's an additional reasoning of Kvod Shabbos and Einik Shabbos? Chof Hei Amud Beis. In the Mishnah we learn, Ein Madlikim be'itran. Itran is probably some type of oil. And the Gemara says, why can't we be Nadlik Ner Shabbos with Itran? It has a very bad smell. So we're afraid a person will leave the room. So Abaye says, V'yetzei, if you want to leave the room, let him leave the room. So what? Rava says, Ner Shabbos Choyva. We don't want him to leave because Ner Shabbos Choyva. And in Shittas Rava, that is where we have the Machlokes Rashi and Tosfos. Ner Shabbos Choyva. Rashi says, Kvod Shabbos. Tosfos says, Einik Shabbos. So let me explain. Abaye says, let him leave. Tosfos on the spot says, everybody agrees that there's a mitzvah of Ner Shabbos. That's not a machlokes Abaye and Rava. The Gemara says, "Ve'avoin shlosh dvorim bonov shel odam meisim," and one of them is if we neglect Ner Shabbos and we abstain from Ner Shabbos, and that is divrei tanoim. So Abaye doesn't disagree. Abaye agrees that there's a mitzvah of Ner Shabbos. But Tosfos doesn't explain, so what is the machlokes Abaye and Rava? Rava is machadish. There's a mitzvah of Ner Shabbos b'mokom seudo. So my interpretation is this. If there's a bad smell in the room, a person will leave the dining room And maybe he's take his food into the living room, into the bedroom, into the kitchen, but he won't leave his house. If you have a bad smell in the house, you're not going to sleep on the street. You're not going to eat on the street. So, Rava is mechadish. We want him to eat b'mokem haner. That is the chiddush of Rava. According to Abaye, you don't need to have a ner dafka b'mokem achila. And that is where the Machlokes Rashi and Tosfos comes in, and that is where the two new concepts come in, Kvod Shabbos and Onik Shabbos. Shalom Bayis obviously is not associated with your eating. In Rashi we find two different pshotim, or maybe two different nuances. What is Shalom Bayis? Rashi Daf Chav Gimel says, Shalo yitztayel eishev b'choshech. It's uncomfortable to sit in the dark. You know, people like to sit in light. Light brings simcha. Machadish batir boy b'chol yom tumid masa bereishis. And we say, what's the pasuk in Berachas Kriya Shema? Light brings simcha. So, we don't want people to sit in the dark. People get agitated. They get nervous sitting in the dark. And Rashi Daf Chov Hey says, Shelo yeh holech v'nichshal ba'afelo. If you move around the house in the dark, you're gonna hurt yourself. You're gonna fall. You're gonna bang into furniture. So obviously, Shalom Bayis is not associated afka b'mokom achila. And according to Abaye, Ner Shabbos is about Shalom Bayis. So if it smells bad, in the dining room, let him go to the living room. What do we care? Tosfos says no. We want him to eat b'mokom haner. That is either Kvod Shabbos or Onik Shabbos. So this is where we know it's not only about Shalom Bayis, it's also about Kvod Shabbos and Onik Shabbos. Halochik Rava. Abaye v'Rava, the halacha is always according to Rava, and therefore we know. And that is why the Rambam also paskins Ner Shabbos as Kvod Shabbos v'Onik Shabbos. But how does the Rambam know it's both Koved and Oinig if there are no Gemaras? We just proved Shalom Bayis, and that explains why Ner Shabbos comes before Ner Chanukah. So Shalom Bayis is a Gemara Mefereshes. How do we know there's an additional concept? From Rava. Mokom Seuda. Shalom Bayis is not associated with Mokom Seuda. And Rava teaches us the reason Eimad Likem Be'itran, where Fred is going to leave Mokom Haner. He's going to leave the dining room where he was Madlik Ner Shabbos, and we don't want him to do that. Mishum Koved Shabbos or Onik Shabbos. So let us explain the Rambam. It is interesting, in 30 prokem in Hilchos Shabbos le Rambam, and the Rambam deals with Ner Shabbos twice, as I mentioned a few moments ago, Perek He and Perek Lamed. But the Rambam doesn't even once mention the concept of Shalom Bayis. How come? If Ner Shabbos is about Shalom Bayis, why doesn't the Rambam write Mitzvah lahadlik Ner Shabbos mishum Shalom Bayis? Aruch HaShulchan Reish Samech Gimel says, Onik Shabbos and Shalom Bayis are the same. Onik Shabbos is feel good, feel comfortable, be happy, and that is actually Shalom Bayis. It's an interesting approach, but it doesn't fit in with the Rambam in the end of Hilchos Chanukah. I mentioned a few moments ago that the Rambam in Hilchos Shabbos doesn't bring at all the concept of Shalom Bayis, but naturally God has to bring it somewhere. He brings it at the very last halacha of Hilchos Chanukah. Ner Shabbos, Ner Chanukah. Actually, the Rambam doesn't write Ner Shabbos, but Ner Beisai, and that's the lashon of the Gemara. Ner Beisai Odof, Mishum Shalom. And the Rambam writes at great length, Lo nitna Torah eronasa Shalom biyonim, shenemed ruchei yodarka noyam, v'chol nesiv yisher Shalom. And the Rambam exalts Shalom. So when the Rambam explains why Ner Beisai comes before Ner Chanukah, Mishum Shalom Bayis, it's clear in the Rambam. It's not Onik Shabbos. It's not a Shabbos-dik Shalom Bayis. It's the general Shalom Bayis. It's not even about Shalom Bayis b'nish lishtoi, but peace for the world, Shalom for the world, Shalom for the universe. And the Rambam defines Shalom Bayis at the end of Hilchos Chanukah as a universal value, definitely not Onik Shabbos. So, Hadra Kushal Aduchta. So according to the Aruch Shulchan, Shalom Bayis is Oineg. And that means Oineg is not dafka b'mukum seuda. Tosefah Shabbos Reish Hamachimel has a totally opposite approach, and he says Oineg Shabbos b'mukum seuda. Koved is loy b'mukum seuda. So let me share with you my feeling regarding the opinion of the Rambam. And I know what he's saying now is a gewaldige chiddush, but I'm convinced it's emes. Ner Shabbos is not about Shalom Bayis. No. Ner Shabbos is either Kvod Shabbos or Oineg Shabbos. Ner Shabbos is not because of Shalom Bayis, because person is supposed to have Shalom Bayis all week, every day, day and night, and not only on Shabbos. So why were Chazal metaka Ner Shabbos only on Shabbos mishum Shalom Bayis? How about the middle of the week? So my feeling is, Ner Shabbos is only about Oineg or Kavod. But the fact is, if you won't have Ner Shabbos, that will diminish and hurt your Shalom Bayis. So Shalom Bayis is the result. It's not the reason. It's not the motive. A person should always be careful about Shalom Bayis and do whatever it takes to enhance his Shalom Bayis. In the middle of the week, just like Shabbos. Ner Chanukah is not about Shalom Bayis. Chazal trusts you will do everything you can to have Shalom Bayis. But if a person will take that one candle that he has and he will light al Pesach Beisov b'chutz Ner Chanukah, and in the house it'll be dark, that'll hurt his Shalom Bayis. And that is why Ner Shabbos comes before Ner Chanukah. Why do I see in what I just said such a gewaldige chiddush? If Shalom Bayis is just a result, an indirect result of Ner Shabbos, could it give precedence for Ner Shabbos before another mitzvah? My answer is yes. And I have a raya for a Gemara Mefreshes Chulin Kuf Mem Aleph Omed Aleph, a totally different sugya. So the Gemara says, we learn from a pasuk, Shaleach de Shalach Esa'em. You always need to send away the mother if you want to take the eggs of the little birds. Even if you need a tzipor for Taharas HaMetzora. And the Gemara asks, what's the chiddush? Taharas HaMetzora is a mitzvah say. שלא חכן איזה עשה ולא תעשה, אין עשה דוחה לא תעשה ועשה. The Gemara says, we would have a hamamina. Because the mitzvah is also betashmish amito, and as long as we do not purify the mitzvah and let him back home to be with his wife, that'll hurt his Shalom Bayis. And Godla Shalom. Shmisha nechte v'kedusha. Omer HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yamoch Haramayim kedei la'aseh Shalom b'nish liyishtoi. And therefore we would have a hamamina, Godla Shalom. Taharas HaMetzora overrides, and I say v'lo ta'aseh. Now, Taharas HaMetzora is not about Shalom Bayis. Shalom Bayis is just a result. Taharas HaMetzora is a mitzvah like all the other mitzvahs of Tumah and Tahara. Like Taharas Tamei Meis, Taharas Kalim. Taharas HaMetzora is not about Shalom Bayis. But the fact is, as long as we aren't mitayah the mitzvah, his Shalom Bayis is diminished. V'yafal piken havi yamina. This mitzvah say carries more weight, more power than any other, and it's deichas v'lo ta'aseh. So I say the same regarding Ner Shabbos and Ner Chanukah. And this brings us to an interesting question. The lashon of the Gemara is Ner Beisoy v'Ner Chanukah Eze mehem koidem Chav Gimel Amud Beis in Shabbos. Is the question only Leil Shabbos or any other day in the middle of the week? Person has one little candle. Does he light outside? Persumen is a Pesach Beis or in the house? Mishum Shalom Bayis. Rashi clearly says the question is only Shabbos. Ritva doesn't speak about this beferish explicitly, but it's clear in the Ritva not only Shabbos, in the middle of the week as well. Halachas Ketanas Mari Chagas Chelik Beis Makuf Pei Aleph doesn't bring Rashi or the Ritva, and he deals with the question, and he is mesupik, and he says, maybe only Ner Shabbos overrides Ner Chanukah. It's a combination of Einik Shabbos plus Shalom Bayis, but Shalom Bayis alone wouldn't override Ner Chanukah. Doiche Godel, the Gemara says clearly, the reason Ner Shabbos comes before Ner Beis comes before Ner Chanukah is because Shalom Bayis, not a combination of Shalom Bayis plus Einik Shabbos. So the Lochas status is very unreasonable. And as I mentioned, it's a machlokes, Rashi and the Ritva. My approach to Rashi would be, and the Rambam naturally, Ner Shabbos is not about Shalom Bayis. Shalom Bayis is a result of Ner Shabbos. And if we won't have a Ner Shabbos, Shalom Bayis will be hurt and diminished. And the same would be in the middle of the week. However, a reshus never overrides a mitzvah. Anything that's not a mitzvah would not override a mitzvah. So middle of the week there is no mitzvah to light candles in your house. And why not? Chazal didn't see a reason to make a mitzvah out of it. Chazal assume every normative person, every sensible person will do whatever it takes to have Shalom Bayis. It's not very pleasant when there's a lack of harmony in one's home. So Chazal didn't see any reason to make a mitzvah out of it. Ner Shabbos is a mitzvah. Not Mishum Shalom Bayis, Einik Shabbos or Kvod Shabbos, as I explained. But being a mitzvah, there is added value and impetus in the fact that not being the kind of mitzvah will hurt your Shalom Bayis. And therefore, Ner Shabbos overrides Ner Chanukah Mishum Shalom Bayis. The other days of the week, Shalom Bayis is equally important, but it's not a mitzvah. And only one mitzvah could override another. And a reshus, any act or deed that is not a mitzvah, will never override a mitzvah. That would be my understanding. So the fundamental chiddush I just explained, the Yesodistic chiddush is, Ner Shabbos is not because of Shalom Bayis. Shalom Bayis is just an indirect result. And that is why the Rambam doesn't mean Shalom Bayis. And this solves the problem. How does the Rambam know there's both Koved Shabbos and Ner Shabbos? Machlokes Abaye and Rava. Abaye says, She Yeitzei. Rava says, what do you mean Yeitzei? Ner Shabbos Chayva. And Tosfos explains, Abaye doesn't maintain Ner Shabbos is not a mitzvah at all. Everybody agrees Ner Shabbos is a mitzvah. According to Abaye, it doesn't necessarily need to be b'mokum seuda. And Rava says, no, it needs to be b'mokum seuda. So I explained the other Rishonim. Abaye feels it's only about Shalom Bayis. Rava is the one that says, no, there's some other element as well, either covered or einik. But the Rambam, his opinion, as I explained, is Shalom Bayis is not the reasoning of Ner Chanukah. So what is Ner Chanukah according to Abaye? Ner Shabbos. Shalom Bayis is not the reasoning for Ner Shabbos. So, what's the machlokes Abaye and Rava? So the Rambam says, according to Abaye, it's only about Einik Shabbos. And Einik Shabbos is in all the rooms. Rava says, no, it's also Kvod Shabbos. And Kvod Shabbos needs to be b'mokom seuda. So, that is how the Rambam understands. It's both Koved and Einik. According to Abaye, only Einik Shabbos? Rava says, Kvod Shabbos as well. So in Rambam is mashma, Perek Lamed Kvod Shabbos is b'mokom seuda, Perek Hey, Einik Shabbos lav dafka b'mokom seuda. But it's a big tema. Because Einik Shabbos generally is definitely associated with Seuda. Barburim Slov V'Dogim. Einik Shabbos is Ma'angoy B'Machal U'B'Mishta. But in the Rambam is mashma Perikoy, when it brings the concept of Einik, not necessarily associated with Suda as Kvod Shabbos is. Tzorkim. So I said that Ner Shabbos is not because of Shalom Bayis. I'd say this primarily in Shittas HaRambam, but there definitely are Rishonim and Poskim that say Ner Shabbos is because of Shalom Bayis, and that is the reason Chazal were mitaken Ner Shabbos. Primarily, it's mefunish in Mordechai, Masechet Shabbos Reish Ayin Gimel, and all the later poskim. The Mishnah Berurah Reish Samach Gimel Sivkot and Chof Tes, and it's actually in Mogen Avraham Reish Samach Gimel Sivkot and Aleph and Sivkot and Yud Gimel. One should light Ner Shabbos in all the rooms, and not only b'mokum seudo. And the Mishnah Berurah paskins with a bracha. So we don't light and make a bracha in every room. But according to the Mishnah Berurah, and obviously the Mogen Avraham, the Sephardim may have two women lighting in the same room because they don't make a bracha until Sefer Soira. So many of them, each woman of the house, when you have children coming to you for Shabbos, and they also want to light Ner Chanukah, they could write in their rooms. So the poskim say one could make a bracha on Adlukas Ner Chanukah not only b'mokum suda, and that is because of Shalom Bayis, based on the Mordechai. So my chiddush is not only with the Kula Alma, it's primarily in accordance to the Rambam, and I do not mean to impose this mahalach on the poskim and the Rishonim, obviously. So one of the big questions all the Gedolim of our time deal with, now that we have electricity, what's the mitzvah of Ner Shabbos? Electricity solves the problem of Shalom Bayis, probably Kovit Shabbos and Einik Shabbos as well. Rashi writes, it is Kovit Shabbos, one shouldn't sit and eat b'choshech. It's not mechubed to eat in a dark room. You don't find your food, you're going to get dirty. So Kovit Shabbos, Einik Shabbos are associated with Mokum Seudah. But now that you have electricity, what is the mitzvah? Three of the greatest Gedolim of our generation, of our era, Igris Moshe, Orachaim Chelekei Simachov Ois Lamed, Moiri V'Rabi HaKodesh, the Divrei Yatzev, Orachaim Kuf Chof. Reb Shem Zalman Auerbach, as quoted in the Shmir Shabbos Kalchosa. Shmir Shabbos Kalchosa was one of Reb Shem Zalman's greatest Talmidim. Reb Yeshua Neuwirth. We had a very, very special friendship. Zechet Tzaddik Levracha. Shenem Badel Chaim Tovim V'Aruchim. So Shmir Shabbos Mem Gimel Ha'ora Kuf Ayin Aleph. The three of them say, even though we have ample light, enough light, electricity lights our homes, it's still a covered for Shabbos to light candles. You come to a wedding, you come to a banquet, every mechubedik affair, you have candles, light candles. There's something beautiful about candles, about fire. Fire could be tragically devastating, but it gives light. And there's something appealing and nice and beautiful about candles. And that is Kvod Shabbos. And these are three of the greatest Gedolim. But the Rishonim make it clear that Kvod Shabbos and Einik Shabbos is not to sit in the dark. This is a new idea, the covet of the beauty of candles. It's not what Chazal had in mind. The Takon of Ner Shabbos was to have light and to eat in a room which has light, and not to eat in the dark. It has nothing to do with the way we perceive a mechubed de kasuda. So I humbly disagree with these three great Gedolim. Rav Moshe in the very same tshuva also has an additional argument, and he says, the lights might go out. There might be Hafzakat Chashmal, an electricity shortage, and therefore you could still make a brocha on Adlukas Ner Shabbos, which is a tremendous daichik in the modern world. It's been many years since there was a blackout. I remember as a young child in New York when there was that famous huge blackout in the entire city. growing up in Eretz Yisrael, it was commonplace. But for many years, it's extremely uncommon and unlikely that there will be an electricity shortage and the lights will go out. That definitely wouldn't justify making a brocha ner Chanukah. Reb Shimon Zalman also has an additional argument, and he says it's a minig, and we say a brocha on a minig, which to me is also very unreasonable. It's not the nature of a minig. A minig needs to be a minig shenikba liyedei Chazal. In the days of Chazal, ner Chanukah wasn't a minig, it was a mitzvah. So I wrote at length, and Minchas Osher Shal Shechuvas Chelik Gimel Siman Yud Zayin. And my opinion is, Ein Shiur ve'ein gvul letoisefes oiro. So the Beis Yosef says, we don't make a broch on the Sefer Seder, but according to the Ramo, we do. So all these Gedolim I quoted say, but today there is no Sefer Seder because electricity is so great, and I say, Ein Shiur at the Sefer Seder. It's impossible to define. What tools do we have to say what is Sefer Seder and what is not Sefer Seder? So according to the Ramo, more than one woman could light Ner Shabbos in the same room. And each of them has a mitzvah. More light is more simcha. More light is more happiness. More light, the better, the more joyous. So many Gedolim say, but there needs to be more light, meaningful, significant. And I say, Ein Shiur with the Sefer Seder. So I know this is based on a lot of diukim and nuances and the shittas of shlo. I can't go into many details, but you could look it up. Minchas Osher, Chelik Gimel Shal Shuvas Siman Yud Zayin. I even argue more than that. Even the Beis Yosef that says two women cannot light in the same room, because we don't say a broch on the Sefer Seder. It is only if the first one lighted a ner lekvoid Shabbos, and that's why the second one can't. But electricity wasn't put on lekvoid Shabbos. And the first woman that lights has a mitzvah of adlukas ner Chanukah, even though she's only giving to Sefer Seder. So I can't discuss this at length, but you could na le'ayen in Minchas Osher and in the other sources I quoted. So this week's parsha is Bahaloischo es hanerois. And Rashi writes, Lama nismacho pashas benera pashas korbanos hanasiyim. Kishara Aaron is korbanos hanasiyim chol shudatoi. He was not one of them. Kodesh Baruch Hu tells him, Shalcho godol mishalahem, she'ato meitev umadlek es hanerois. And why is that greater than korbanos hanasiyim? I just want to briefly explain two different feelings, sentiments, drochim. Number one, Korbanos HaNasiyim was a one-time event, Chanukas HaMishkan. Atovas HaNeiros, Adlukas HaNeiros, which is the Avodah Ba'aron, is daily, is ongoing. The Pasuk says, Mi ya'ala b'har Hashem, u'mi yakum b'mkom kodsho. And sometimes I say, Mi ya'ala b'har Hashem is one question. Who could reach the top of the mountain? The other question is, Mi yakum b'mkom kodsho. Who will stand on top of the mountain? Some people could rise to the challenge. And in times of test, in dramatic eras of nisyanis, of chaos, people rise to the challenge. It is harder to serve a Kodesh Baruch Hu b'chol avavcho u'b'chol nafsho u'b'chol mo'idecho in times of routine, living a life of Torah, living a life of mitzvah, living a life in the direct presence of a Kodesh Baruch Hu. V'ani kirvas Elokim li toiv. So the Nesiim had a one-time challenge, and they rose to the challenge. They beautifully brought each and every one of them what was required from them, and that was Korbanos HaNasiyim. And Aaron was so sorry he didn't have the privilege. He wasn't one of them. And the Kodesh Baruch Hu tells him, Shalcho godel mishalahem. Your avodah to me is routine. It's daily, every day. Machlokes Rambam and Rashba, maybe twice a day. Meituv umadlek es haneros. The other thought is, I explained so many times that the fundamental avodas in Beis HaMikdash were three, associated with the three central kelim, menorah, mizbeach, and shulchan. Menorah symbolizes Torah, ki ner mitzvah v'Torah or. Goes without saying that mizbeach is avodah. Rabbeinu Yonah actually in the Mishnah, in the beginning of Oves al Shloisha Devarim Oila Moimed al Torah al Avodah val Gebeles al Sodom, explains avodah as avodah as a korbanos. It is only after Churban Bayis that Tefillah steps in, substituting for korbanos, Tefillah Keneget Korbanos Tiknu, and the Shulchan symbolizes Gebeles al Sodom. So, of all the three pillars of the world, equally important, but the Zohar Kodesh, many times, in the Akdama to the Zohar says that the central pillar is Torah. Miyamin u'mismoil, from right and from left, the central pillar is supplemented and supported by Avodah and Gemeles Chosodim. And I explained many times in the Heichel there were three kelim. In the actual Avodah, it is essential to have both Torah, Avodah, and Gemeles Chosodim. And you cannot forgo any of the three. It's not either Torah or Avodah or Chesed. It's Torah plus Avodah plus Chesed. But that is in practicality. That is in the Heichel. In Kodesh HaKodeshim, Lefnai v'Lefnim, totally be'itkasya, in concealment, Torah reigns supreme. All we have in Kodesh HaKodeshim is Aroin Uedus, V'bo Luchas Abris, and a Sefer Torah. And that is why Kodesh Baruch Hu tells Aaron HaKohen, don't be sad, don't be sorry. Shalcha Godel Misholahem, She'atu Meitev, Umadlek Es haneros. So let us be careful and devoted and dedicated to Torah and Avodah and Gemeles Chosodim. But let us also not forget the Talmud Torah Keneged Kulo. שתלמוד מביא לידי מעשה שלך גודל משלהם שאת ומיטב ומדלק את הנרות. ושתזכו בקרוב בימינו, תביאס משיח צדקנו במהרה וימינו.